let's get to the previews here, and we're going to start with your Santa Clara Broncos. This is a team that has won 20 or more games in 4 straight seasons, 5 of the last 6. Herb Sendek entering year 10 at the head of the Santa Clara program. They were in the NIT. They made to the second round. There's obviously some good pieces coming back for this squad, and a lot of intrigue with some of the talent. And of course, I feel like the entire preview, the entire outlook has changed because of the addition of one guy, and that's Thierry Darlan.
Some may say that. When you just mentioned that year 10 of Herb Sendek, time is flying. It almost doesn't feel that way. People are starting to say Herb Sendek, oh, the Santa Clara coach, not Herb Sendek, oh, the ASU coach, or Herb Sendek, the NC. Like, it's Herb Sendek, Santa Clara Bronco head coach right there. So that's just to start with. It feels crazy to say that year 10 of the Sendek era. And for me, Santa Clara is a very intriguing team. And just I understand that I went to Santa Clara and I understand like the preconceived bias notions that can come with. But at least for me, I'm a big prove it guy. And at least from my perspective, like they lost a lot. Like you lost a lot of guys. Christoph Tilley gone, Carlos Stewart gone, Adama Alpha Ball gone, Tyree Bryant gone. And you have guys who are coming in from Big Ten programs and big tier programs that didn't play. And are you trying to unearth the next Brandon Pajimski? Because that's certainly what it seems like right now. And then you have other returners who are coming back. Are they ready for that spotlight? There are some guys who I think would do better with good opportunity. The guy that comes to mind for me is Brenton Napper. He's someone who's very smart, very in tune with the offense, very fundamentally sound. What can he do with a bigger role? That's something that I'm very intrigued by. So for me, Santa Clara, they're probably one of the more intriguing teams in the WCC. And I say that from a perspective of we don't really know what we're going to get with the Broncos this year. And that's really the one thing I want to see. How do they establish consistency over everything? Because sometimes when the jump shots weren't falling, the bottom fell out. And then sometimes they'd get out physical and then the bottom would fall out then. So for me, how can they find a way to stay even keeled as the development process takes shape this season?
Thinking about that, because you're right. Like there was a lot of almost like ride or die with the 3-point shot. Like if they were shooting it well, this team was going to play really well. If they were not shooting it well, it might be a rough night. But looking at the construction of this roster, I don't think that they're going to have that ability like we've seen in years past, the last few years. They don't look the part of a team that's going to just drain threes. Like they're not going to hit 15, 18 threes in a given night with this squad. They're going to have to do it maybe a little bit more of a traditional way. They're going to have to be a little bit grittier, I think, than we've seen in years past. And at the very least, I think you do have a few guys who kind of play right into that grittiness. You have Elijah Mahi coming back and being that leader for this squad. You mentioned Brenton Napper being the guy who can lead this offense and has always kind of been in that backup role, is going to be looked upon to take on more leadership. You look at someone like Jake Ensminger, someone who also has kind of been in that mold. I expect him to take a big leap. We know like there's a lot. We see the potential with Ensminger. I think we just haven't got to see it in a lot of ways because he's been sitting behind Tilley, sitting behind a lot of the other veterans on this squad. And we haven't seen it be consistent enough. So this is the year where I think he's going to get a lot of opportunity early to show that consistency, to prove that he can be a little bit more of that everyday starter. But then you mentioned some of the other guys that are coming in. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Finalist for State of Illinois Mr. Basketball, 3-star recruit. What basic 59% shooter, 39% from 3. It's like 4 assists, almost 5 assists, 17 points. It feels like I'm describing Brandon Pajemski, but no, I'm not. I am describing one of the recruits coming in, Bradley Longcore the third. When I was starting to look at the profile, look at everything, I'm like, is this Pods 2.0?
Yeah, like there's so many different interesting profiles, and you mentioned Longcore right there. I think some of the other profiles are looking at Chris Todjo coming in from Iowa. Like that's a guy who's looking for opportunity. You look at Garrick Normand, Michigan State, different types of opportunity. Look at that. I really want to peel back that Jake Ensminger curtain, because if there was an award for most improved player, if Jake Ensminger can consistently make his jump shot Like last year kind of escaped him compared to the small volume from 2 years ago. If he nails a shot, I would always put him up for like most improved player because he's kind of like the glue in some respects that holds Santa Clara together. Someone who's willing to do the dirty work, crash the board, someone just do a little bit of everything, kind of almost as a point forward for a very short amount of time in a given game for Santa Clara. And at least for me, it's like, how does Herb Sendek push the right buttons to get the best version of this team? And I think that's really the intriguing process, because then you have another guy coming off a redshirt, Christian Hammond, who had a very, I'd say a very solid end to the, let me make sure I have my years correct here, the 23-24 season had a pretty solid end. It was kind of emerging, and then redshirted last year. What does he look like? Alan Graves. I've heard a lot about him in practice saying that he's very dang good, but he redshirted last year. So how does that all kind of play out? Who are some of those guys that step up? And in kind of almost a comparison to the Gonzaga in our last episode, they have a lot of good trying to get into great elite. Santa Clara has a lot of unproven who can be good and then maybe eventually great. So for me, there's so many different profiles with this Broncos team. I think probably maybe a lot more volatility in recent years is probably the biggest question that I have for them, but definitely some interesting pieces of the puzzle, and ones that I think Broncos fans should be equally as intrigued by, but not necessarily be blinding lights. Yes, this team's going to win the conference championship.
Yeah, I mean, intrigue has to be the word for the Santa Clara team, at least in the preseason, because as you mentioned, the lack of tape, the lack of game experience that this group has doesn't really give you a whole lot to work with to try to predict what they're going to be. You have a lot of guys. You mentioned Norman, not a whole lot of playing time at Michigan State. You look at Tajo, a little bit of playing time at Iowa, but not terribly consistent. Cochran coming in as a freshman, Longcore coming in as a freshman. You have Francis Chukwudebelu, also freshman coming in, highly recruited freshman, 6'10" center out of Texas. Like, this is a kid who's going to, I think, turn a lot of heads early on, and is going to get opportunity to get a lot of minutes at that center spot. There's so many unknowns about this Santa Clara team, but the one thing that we have seen is that we know that Herb Sendek can develop these guys.
Yeah,
we have seen it countless times when you look at up and down the roster, not just the NBA guys. And this is not just Pods, not just some of the others. This is, you're looking at something that for a team that is going to get it from up and down the roster. The development that we're going to see out of Jake Ensminger, a development that we're going to see out of Elijah Mahi. I'm probably more excited about Elijah Mahi than most everybody in the WCC, because like, he does so many of the little things right. He distributes, he shoots, he crashes the boards. He's like a top level talent that does all the dirty work. And like, now he has the opportunity to like, no, you can be the main guy for this squad. And I think he needs to be a little bit more of that main guy, alongside maybe the one guy who's maybe has the most proof to what he is going to be, and that's Thierry Darlan, coming from the G League to join Santa Clara, which I know a lot of people have been like throwing around like, how in the hell was this even possible that we now have actual professionals coming back to play in college sports? But regardless of the fact that it shouldn't have happened, maybe whatever the case, it happened. He's going to be playing for the Broncos, and he alongside Mahi is going to be an absolute nightmare for anyone in the WCC. So this guy is 6'8", 6'8" wing, 7'3" wingspan. He can play the 2, the 3, the 4. He was averaging double digits, shooting 45% in the G League this past year. The combination of Darlan and Mahi could end up being the best 1-2 punch in the WCC if everything goes right.
See, you heard it here first, guys. Get your newspapers with the headlines. The NCAA is rigging it for Santa Clara, guys. That is what's happening, and you are all bearing witness. But yeah, to be quite honest with you, had Darlan not gotten with the Broncos, and I think that's obviously was a very big possibility before that happened, you're just saying, okay, this is what the team is. For me, my biggest question was going to be scoring guards. Like, where does the firepower come from Santa Clara? Because I would classify Elijah Mahi as a 3. He's a forward that kind of can dabble in a little bit of everything, handle the ball a little well, spot up shooting, took on some pretty beastly defensive assignments in terms of people who were guarding him. The one thing for me that I really want to see from him this year is, can he finish at the rim? Too many times he smoked layups last year, and I think it's such a nitpicky thing, but you notice it over the course of time, especially in close games, especially when you're a star player. More eyes are on you. There's more scrutiny that's on you, and at least for me, that's a little thing for me that I can see. If those are layups that turn into dunks, if those are things where he can just be a little more crisp at the rim as he's trying to navigate through traffic, that's the one thing from Elijah Ma. He can stay consistent. Can he finish at the rim? He does that. I think he's well on his way to potentially all WCC first team this year. And you look at that combining with Thierry Darlan. I think Darlan's explosiveness, I think, is going to be the key to unlocking the Santa Clara team, because you kind of look at the way that Carlos Stewart, both in his first stint and his comeback year last year, when you're head first bowling to the rim, that's a good thing. But can you be kind of like chaotically in control, so to speak? So can Thierry Darlan be chaotically in control, find a way to get to the rim, and then potentially draw in extra defenders to kick it out to a guy like Napper in the corner? So the balance of being on ball, off the ball, and then turning that around into the right level of explosiveness for me, I think would unlock the Santa Clara team. And that's the part where I have the biggest pause of, how does this come together?
I mean, does Darlan joining the WCC, like, because this is a bona fide professional, someone who's played in the G League, is like, and he has a lot of the physical tools, is he automatically the most explosive, the most dynamic player in the WCC? Because I mean, the short list is going to be Grant Foster, Tyrone Riley. Like, you're looking at kind of like that crew, and like Darlan almost immediately jumps into that, if not ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you really argue it. That's the one thing for me. It's like the best part of we don't know, and I understand that there's G League tape. The best part of I don't know is that you don't know the answer in a good way, and you also don't know the answer in the bad way either. So like, yes, at face value, a professional is coming to play NCAA Division I college basketball in the West Coast Conference. How does that translate? Because I think you're going to have other guys who are, and I'm looking at players on the upper tier teams in the conference, they're going to say, well, I want to lock you up like that. They're going to take that as a personal challenge when they walk into each other's building, saying, you think you're so good that you can drop down to this level? No, I'm going to go lock you up, limit you to have a bad stream night. You're going to go 2 of 11 on my watch and basically have a miserable night. So for me, it's like, yes, how does Darlan adapt? But how do the other people adapt with it? Because I think, at least for me, I'm going to see a lot more matchups where they're going to be like, yeah, I want to take you out of the game and you alone, and see what the rest of your team can do. So I want to see how Darlan navigates his first sense of adversity, because there will be adversity in the sense of in the season. So how does he matriculate that process over from different levels of basketball?
I think it's also going to be a matter of like, there's got to be a level of, and maybe there was this from the beginning of humility coming back to this level, because again, it's like, to your point, everyone's kind of going to have a little bit of a target on his back, because this is an actual G leaguer who dropped down a level, and he had to come down for a reason. This wasn't just like a random like happening. Like, there had to be a legitimate reason as to why he took the demotion. And I don't know, like, maybe the NIL was better there than his G League contract, and it might have been as simple as that. But there has to be a reason why, on a basketball front, that he makes this return.
Yeah.
Running into, like, talking with Jalen Williams, talking to Brandon Pajemski, running into Keyshawn Justice, like one of the Santa Clara guys. Maybe that's how this really all started, as far as like the possibility of him coming back, because I don't think any of us would have even thought of the idea of like, oh yeah, a G leaguer will come back and play college.
Nah.
And especially for Santa Clara.
Nah. Yeah, no, that was really never in my window, never on my cards. And it kind of just popped into my plate saying, yeah, by the way, this is probably going to happen this week. I'm like, okay. But yeah, I like that you pointed to the lineage of the development process within the Santa Clara program. And I think that's really all the proof that was needed in terms of making that decision, because yes, you want to fit in an institution, but the ultimate goal is the same. You want to go to the NBA. You want to be up and not necessarily floating around the G League, but you don't want to be stuck there. You want to make sure that you have a trajectory and a path. And look at the path that Santa Clara has given individuals over the course of the last few seasons. The proof's in the pudding there. And I think there's no doubt about what the development process is under Herb Sendek in regards to that. And maybe, who knows, is he the guy that unlocks the team that contends for a conference championship? Who knows? At least that's not necessarily what I'm expecting. But I think when you consider all the different possibilities that have been coming to fruition over the last month, I think you can't rule it out. But that's one where you have to strike while the iron's hot, and especially if how does that work if he's tasked to run the offense, be more on the ball if Napper's in foul trouble or whatever else is happening? Because Santa Clara, they got a lot of unproven size. That is probably the other big thing for me is what does center look like? Because Buki Aboye is probably the de facto starter, and he was third string last year, would come in and basically immediately foul. So that's the another area where I'm like, okay, well, like we're going to get on the coaster one way or the other.
Yeah. And I mean, with the schedule, they're not going to have a whole lot of time to really figure things out. They're going to have to hit the ground running. You look at the first three Division I games that are on the slate: McNeese, Xavier, and Nevada. You're going to have to pick it up pretty quickly on what these rotations are going to look like, what the comfortability each other is going to have with their new teammates, what the returners are going to look like with kind of with their new sets of roles. They'll get a little bit of a reprieve after that. Idaho State, Louisiana, of course. This is Santa Clara. It's like you do have to can't sleep on any of these games.
North Dakota State guys.
These games we have seen it in the past, and they've snipped them in the heels and cost them potential at-large consideration in the last few years. Now, I'm not saying that this team is going to be in that conversation, but if they come out of the gates, hypothetical, get McNeese, they go to Xavier, win at Xavier, they beat Nevada, they clear through Idaho State, Louisiana, St. Louis comes next. They get to the Acrisure, and they are sitting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If they're 6-0 going into the Acrisure and at the very least split, I think we're starting to at least have the conversation that the Santa Clara team may be onto something.
I would entertain that possibility had I expect that to happen. I quite frankly don't expect that to happen. And that's no shade on my guys, because I'm always going to believe in them, but I'm a realist over a sunshine pumper more than anything. And I think the one thing is we talk about those losses, and I think it stretches both from non-conference and conference losses over the last few years where don't make it matter. Okay. Like the reason we're bringing up these games is because you keep losing those games. So the at Portland, at home to USD, you mentioned North Dakota State last year. Don't make it matter. Just let that off to the side. If you can continue to take care of business like you're supposed to, then we will not make it matter as we are right now in this discussion. So for me, it's those building blocks. Take care of business like you're expected to. Expectations are not for you to have a winning season. Expectations are not for you to have just a winning conference record. Expectations are not just for you to have a flashy upset win and then kind of erase some of that goodwill in other games. Expectations are to be a consistent 20-plus win program that is now on the verge of contending for conference championships. And yes, this is probably a roster that's more challenged to accomplish that feat in quite some time, but that doesn't mean I'm going to let them off the hook in doing so, because if the standard is what you say it is and the lineage is what it has been over the last few years, this team's going to have to go out and prove it. And they have a long mountain to climb. Can they do it? I think there's obviously a world where they can, but is it going to be a lot more challenging than in years past? That I'm also in the same boat of.
Looking at their start of WCC play, I do think that there is at least a track where they can kind of hit the ground running a little bit. They started off at Oregon State, but then they're doing the Oregon swing at Oregon State, at Portland. Then they're back home for Pepperdine, San Diego before they see Gonzaga. And then it's LMU and Pacific following that. There's a lot of winnable games that should be winnable games in that first 7-game stretch. Obviously, you look at Gonzaga, at Oregon State being the two toughest of those matchups. But Santa Clara went up to Oregon State, won at Oregon State, so it's not like something that they haven't done. And you think about, the Gonzaga game, last opportunity to win in Spokane, and you won in Spokane last year.
That did happen. That will not be stricken from the record. But Zach, I hate to be that guy for you, and I hate to open that wound. Yep, I'm going to do it.
Yep. Other way around.
I wish Santa Clara won at historic Gill Coliseum last year. That unfortunately that was a trend for the USF Dons that they got to accomplish as opposed to the Broncos. But yeah, no, I look at the opening slate of this conference schedule, entirely gettable, very much open on the possibility of being 4-0. I would personally expect 3-1, but that I'm not the one who plays the game. But at least in my case, can Santa Clara not get bitten from the side? Can they not get dragged into a bar fight and kind of let other teams dictate the pace? I look at last year's game at LMU. That's the one that sticks out to me, where it's you do so much good, and then it just kind of gets unwoven a little bit right there. I'm not saying that you have to beat St. Mary's twice, but you can't be getting blown out at home by 30 points. I think it was 2 years in a row now that they've been blown out by 30 points at home. So those two things right there, and I know that the garbage time score last year doesn't dictate that, but just in general, like you can't be relative to who you are, and that requires consistency both on the top end and low end.
If there's a positive to the St. Mary's opportunity this time around, is that you don't have to face Gonzaga right before you play St. Mary's.
Well, that was fun.
It's Pacific this time around.
Yeah, no, it's good because Pacific is a good matchup for Santa Clara and has been, according to Dave Smart. He's like, that's a team we just have not figured out. And the Tigers trying to face up against the Broncos. I look at the stretch towards the end of the season, the last 4 games, home against Gonzaga, at USF, at St. Mary's, home against Oregon State. And who knows what the Beavers are by that point. But just in general, I mean, Santa Clara, you minding your P's and Q's is not just going for an upset. And that's why.
Hey, don't discount Seattle as the beginning of that stretch.
That's true. Like look at me, like getting on my high horse thinking that 4th place is a shoo-in when it's not. It really isn't. And that's the one thing where I think probably it's going to be the biggest point of contention with my own fan base, so to speak. Like the window, I think, is pretty tight for this team. To be the margin of error is pretty slim. I think the range of where they finish is pretty tight. Like when I look at things and the way things are falling, it's so easy. And I'm trying to think of the way to articulate the meme of where the guy's coming up from like a gopher hole and like grabs you into it. Can Santa Clara avoid being grabbed into the middle of the pack bar fight? And that's the one thing I really want to see this year. Are they entirely capable? Yes. And I know I'm, going back and forth with like playing both sides of the fence here, but that's really what it is when you're almost the box of chocolates team in the WCC this year. You don't really know what you're going to get, and you have to really figure it out fast because there's no time for the weary, and especially in a conference that is very high powered, high profile, the one that has given you thorns in the side, both from the top end of the conference to the bottom end of the conference. There's no days off.
So again, you mentioned, we're talking about it. Like, we just don't know about the Santa Clara team. But the one thing I can say is that this team has been, regardless of who's been on this roster the last 4 or 5 years, there's a consistency that Herb Sendek has ran this program with, and it has yielded results.
Yep.
And that is the one thing that you can say. And as consistency matters. And yes, we always can talk about Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and the consistency that they have had at the very top. USF has also developed that level of consistency, and now we're starting to see Santa Clara develop that level of consistency. And this is where, again, you talk about like the small window of where they probably finish. I think that is true. I think we're looking somewhere, but in my opinion, they're between 4th and 6th. That's probably the small window where Santa Clara ends up. I cannot see them dropping below 6th. Like if they end up 7th, they end up 8th, the bottom has completely fallen out for the Santa Clara team. This feels like if everything goes right, 4th is where they'll be. If things go sideways a little bit, that's when Oregon State can take advantage. That's when Seattle can take advantage. And that's who could potentially leapfrog the Broncos in that middle of the pack.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. My window is really 4th to 5th, so we're not too terribly far off one another. And at least for me, you think of it in the sense of graduating to the next year. I've talked about it with different teams going from the lower pack to the middle of the pack. For Santa Clara, they want to be on the level of, I would say they're fighting within the tier of USF and Santa Clara. I think they're their own tier, at least for the past few years, and maybe USF's trying to graduate to the next one. Santa Clara, it's getting to be the time to graduate into that next tier, but I just don't think this is the year that it's going to happen. And you look at the timeline now, it's going to be this 4th season. By the end of it, it'll be the 4th season removed of having like Jalen Williams, if I have my timelines correct here. Because then you had Pods, you had Adama Alpha Ball
for 2 years.
Yeah, for 2 years. And now this is going to be season number 4 where you don't have Jalen Williams anymore. So it's like you want the tangible progress to be noted because that's kind of where it all started and where it all began. And it's like, okay, like if you sideswipe to 6th spot, then it's like, well, did we really capitalize on what's going on here? So that's for me, that's the rock in the hard place for Santa Clara this year. And yeah, 4th and 5th is where I'm going to stand. 4th in terms of its ceiling, 5th in terms of its floor. I feel like that's where Santa Clara is going to be this year, and I'm happy to be proven wrong by them. But I think the big thing is and you've noted this with St. Mary's, there are just so many different questions about these top end teams this year that I'd say the range is somewhat bigger than in years past, but these teams have had chances to prove themselves. They have had consistency over these years. It's just a matter of how much you think they can reach into the well another time.
Yeah, so time will tell with the Broncos. We will probably end up talking with Coach Sendek and some of the guys down at Media Day next week. So we're going to get a little bit more info on the Santa Clara team and really kind of like get a little bit more info on what we should expect to see from this Broncos squad.